Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Brad Kearns is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out his first appearances on episode 24 and episode 152 of Boundless Body Radio. Brad Kearns is a New York Times bestselling author, number one ranked USA Master track and field high jumper for ages 50 to 59, Guinness World Record setting speed golfer, and former U.S. national champion and number three world ranked professional triathlete. Brad has worked extensively with Mark Sisson to promote the Primal Blueprint lifestyle with books, seminars, retreats, and online courses. In 2017, their book, The Keto Reset Diet, which is one of my absolute favorite books on the topic, became a New York Times bestseller and reached number one on overall on Amazon. Brad hosts the BRAD podcast, which has been ranked a top 10 Apple podcast in the fitness category. The podcast covers health, fitness, peak performance, personal growth, happiness, relationships, and longevity. Brad promotes the idea of pursuing peak performance with passion throughout life. In 2018, as we discussed in episode 24, Brad broke the Guinness World Record for the fastest single hole of golf ever played, and he birdied it. Oh my goodness, that's amazing. During his 9-year career as a triathlete, Brad amassed 30 wins worldwide on the pro circuit, 2 U.S. national championships, and a number 3 world ranking. You can find Brad on his website at bradkearns.com. Brad Kearns, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh, it's just my boundless enthusiasm to be back on the show. I can't describe it, and you're doing such a great job. Love the intro, and we're here with many more important things to talk about and set the world straight on a good path.
Your proper introduction would have taken me about a half hour to get through if I were to mention all of the things that you are currently doing or have done in your life. So greatly abbreviated to get it down under 2 minutes. You are quite busy, my friend. You're always doing something different. And one of my favorite things that really stood out in the introduction is not only are you promoting longevity and peak performance and all this stuff, but we mentioned happiness and joy. And you have just found a way to kind of ride that line of like, yes, our diet is really important. Yes, we want to be healthy and we got to get these workouts in and all this stuff. But at the same time, like you have this lightness and way of kind of explaining things that like at the end of the day, we're here for a brief moment in time and we're going to be gone and nobody's really going to remember us that much. And we can just kind of like look around and enjoy things as they come, you know?
Yeah, well said, man. And I think there's lots of ways to educate. You can come in with a sledgehammer, which is one of the popular strategies on social media these days, right? But I think that injecting a sense of humor into everything, including the really dire topics that are near and dear to my heart. Like, we really have to clean up our act and get this processed food out of our diet. We really have to withstand the incredible influence of mobile technology and the potential negatives that can really harm our life these days. And so these are serious topics, but certainly you can have some levity as you address them. And then it's all about, sticking a memory into the listener, the viewer, and getting some food for thought to take back and see if you might work with it yourself and put some new ideas into play. And I think that's more effective than getting beat over the head or getting shamed or getting these things that generate short term. The research about coaching these days is evolving, and you see a different approach to coaching than the old school approach that maybe people like you and I are familiar with. Back in, my eighth grade coach was so mean and he made me hate the sport by the end of the season, but I ran my best time. We need to do away with that kind of nonsense and make this, holistic approach to health. And that's why I put those adjectives in my show description, because really, it can be pretty lonely up there at the top of the food chain where you're the most scrutinizing eater, but you turn down all social opportunities because it might not be gluten free, or there might be seed oils at the high school reunion gathering. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. If you're looking for those sledgehammers, that's what Twitter is for. Go play around on Twitter until you
Mm.
feel terrible about yourself. You approach things in a much kinder way. And the timing of our conversation couldn't have been better. You just had a birthday, which is a huge birthday for yourself. I remember a Patton Oswalt stand up where he basically said, once you're an adult, once you turn 21, you only get birthdays every decade. So I had one last year when I turned 40. When you're 41, you go to work. There's no birthday. You don't get one. You just had a birthday. And tell us why that is so important for you and your training. It's a big one.
Oh, thanks, Casey. Yeah, I just turned 60 last week. This is early 2025. And my current athletic obsession is masters track and field. So I've done all those things that you mentioned on my bio, but now I feel like, at this age, I have some good energy left into me to be powerful and explosive and go after performance times. And the world of masters track is so fascinating because you see these outliers that are performing at the highest level ever seen in the history of humanity. My friend Sue McDonald, who was on my podcast, she's a female masters athlete, 62 years old. She's broken 15 world records in the last couple years in her division in track and field. So whatever she's doing, and I think we need to devote more attention and appreciation to actual athletes and outliers who are performing, whereby instead we're kind of obsessing with science, or influencers who put out a lot of content and say this is the best protocol for strength training and endurance, and you need to go do these VO2 max workouts and these zone 2 training sessions, and all that stuff's good, and a lot of the top people are very well researched and thoughtful, and a lot of them are athletic themselves. But I want to dig deep into what Sue McDonald's world, daily day-to-day regimen is, because no female over 60 has ever been even close to her in many of these different events. So when I was interviewing her, I said, "Hey, can you tell us about your daily, fitness and overall healthy living routine?" And she goes, "Well, I can, but it's really boring." And I thought that was such a wonderful takeaway from the interview, where she's not jumping into the cold plunge and then going into a pulse electromagnetic field bed, and then having her nutrition scrutinized and taking 138 pills every day, like Brian Johnson, the $2 million health influencer that's using high-tech interventions to go for longevity. She's just putting in the work. Interestingly, top athletes, including the elites that we just saw in the Olympics last year in Paris, they're performing by and large under the radar. They're performing well within their capacity every single day. They're not doing like we see on the Hollywood movies, where they run their 3 laps around the track really fast, and then they go onto their hands and knees and they start vomiting in the infield. They're very carefully building over years and decades of foundation, of course. But I think that's a wonderful takeaway for all of us, especially those of us in the advancing age groups, where this ideal that has been promoted in social media and fitness culture, that you want to go and crush a workout and then post it up on your site. And I'm using that term crush. I'm calling that out as really it really sends a terrible message, because when you go and crush workouts, you're going to crush your body. And then I can get on a show here at age 60 saying, guys, don't do that when you're 30, 40, or 50, because you'll be paying the price later. So continuing my rant and finally answering your question, I competed in my first Masters track and field meet in the new age category, because you age up every 5 years. So now I'm in the 60 to 64 division. So at this meet at UCLA, I'm 4 days into the division, guaranteed to be the youngest guy competing anywhere. And I'm now #1 in the world in high jump and #2 in the 400 meters, my 2 favorite events. And as I posted on Instagram, I don't mind bragging about my accomplishments, but I also said it really helps to be 4 days old and also to have a really early season meet before the big dogs are, dusting off their equipment and getting out there. But what's interesting in Masters, like I mentioned, Sue and some other outliers, my coach advisor, Cynthia Monteleone, also a world champion in women's 45 division, 400 meters, faster running than she did in NCAA track and field 2 or 3 decades ago.
Oh my goodness.
There's these top performers, but it's not super deep. So I encourage anyone listening that wants to maybe pursue a novel competitive event. You can go and train and show up at these meets, and you'll be welcome, even if you don't think you're that fast. You might get 8th, as I told my friends. I said, if you had showed up today, you would have got 8th. And my friend's eyes bug out, and I'm like, yeah, there was 7 people in the lanes, and there's 8 lanes. So you definitely, absolutely would have gotten 8th in the 400 meters if you showed up.
Top 10. That's a top 10 finish.
Yeah,
That's
top
great.
10 finish,
Yeah,
baby.
exactly. And I'll have to go back and listen. I thought for a second you said that the 400 was your favorite, one of your favorite events. That everybody knows that can't be true. I must have misheard you when you said you like the 400. Nobody likes the 400.
I know. It's funny, Casey, and I'm actually developing, like I'm going to do a whole podcast about this longevity trackers that we're so obsessed with these days, like the blood work and the genetic testing. And I think that the 400 meters is probably the ultimate longevity tracking achievement, or marker, because you sequentially exhaust through all the high intensity energy systems of the body. And so, really quickly with exercise physiology, from 0 to 7 seconds, we burn pure ATP in the muscle cell. It's not we're burning sugar, we're not burning fatty acids, we're just blasting that single rep deadlift max, or we're sprinting. And even in the Olympic 100 meters, guys are decelerating, gals are decelerating in the last few seconds because we can only truly generate maximum output for around 7 seconds. Then you transition into what's called the lactate pathway, where you're burning lactate as a fuel. You're creating that byproduct, the acid in your muscles that causes the muscle burn. And then when you exhaust that, you have to tap into anaerobic glucose metabolism. And so by the time you get around the track, for a race that takes around a minute or less than a minute for the top people, you have blasted through all your capabilities in the various energy systems. So it's true torture for an entire lap around the track. Unlike, for example, the 100 meters, which is it's so fun. You get to be explosive and powerful, but then it's over before you truly get that incredible, intense pain and muscle burn and exhaustion that you get from the longer events. And then if we go up to the middle distances like 800, 1500, these are tough events as well. People are familiar with maybe running a 5K. It's no picnic when you're trying to run fast, but this is all about pacing and having that endurance conditioning. There's no such thing in the 400. The pacing is a little bit, but basically the gun goes off and you try to sprint all the way around the track, which the human is not truly capable of doing. So you're going against physiology and the laws of nature, essentially.
Oh my goodness, absolutely brutal. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, especially as it pertains to longevity and advancing age. I look at you and Mark as some of my great examples in life. And it happened, the other week I stepped off the ice at ice hockey, and the guy next to me
Whoa.
in the locker room was like, "Doesn't it suck to age? Like, you just your back hurts, your knee hurts." And I understood him and I understood what he meant, but I told him, like, "Look, man, at 41, I feel amazing. I feel as good as I ever felt. I feel way better than 30. I've been largely carnivorous for the last 6 years, and joints feel great and all this stuff." And I
Mm,
look at you and Mark doing the same, just thriving at ages 60 and 70, 71 respectively. And
hmm
I love your work. And as it pertains to the workouts and knowing both of your histories with competitive sports and what you promote now and the way you describe things is very similar to the way that I train my clients and recommend,
mm,
they do their workouts. It's much far less than the way I would have promoted it in the past. And
mm,
my first question around that is, as you're promoting some of your ideas around exercise and telling people that they don't need to do it nearly as much as they are you ever surprised by the pushback you get from people that don't seem to think it's like the greatest news ever? Like, you would think, like, you could accomplish everything you need in like 20 minutes in the gym. Wouldn't you rather do that than go every day? But you still get pushback from people that like can't like figure that out or don't want to hear it. Does that ever like surprise you?
Yeah, it's also surprising how much lip service we pay to ourselves, right? So there is pushback, and then there's also tremendous, excitable nodding in agreement with expressing a message like I did earlier. Oh, that's a wonderful tip, Brad. Thank you so much for sharing that you can train under the radar and well within your capacity at every workout like the elite athletes. And then, hey, how's it going? Oh, I banged up my knee again and I'm on the sideline. So I think we really have to get some clarity on what is our purpose for going out there and pursuing these fitness goals. When we're speaking to the highly motivated, driven, competitive type of audience, we have a whole nother conversation for people that would really benefit from getting their butt off the couch and getting out there and getting moving. So that's a different discussion. But for that devoted fitness enthusiast who's trying to answer to the cultural messaging and the pressures around them, and also that inner drive that makes you want to feel accomplished and competitive and honing that intensity every single day with everything you do, whether it's studying for law school or going out and playing in the intramural soccer team and then going in the gym and putting up numbers. That's where we have to come sit back and say, wait a second, what are you all about? What are your highest goals and priorities? And then if you're behaving in conflict with your stated goals and values and priorities, that is the mere definition of self-sabotage. I had a guest on my podcast named Thais Gibson. She runs the Personal Development School. And she processed me on my own show because I was talking about how, of course, I'm so locked in with health and fitness and healthy eating, and I don't need to motivate myself to shop for the right products, nor do I need to motivate myself to get my butt up in the morning and go into my exercise and my training sessions. But but I mentioned offhand during our interview, like, yeah, but the same thing when it comes to like my financial responsibility and my wealth building and my scrutiny of my expenses and my budget and the economic consequences of my actions, I'm not very strong there. And she says, "Okay, Brad, let's process you on the show." So the show went from whatever the talking points we had to like, why do you suck at, budgeting, finances, and all these things that are your stated goals and values and ideals. These are mean a lot to me. I'm turning 60. I'm not going to work forever, blah, blah, blah. And the answer is like, you you get done and you get the instant gratification that you go for every single day, and that's the subconscious acting it out. And so when we go into the gym and we do a workout that's way too difficult for our current fitness level, or we try to keep up with our buddy on that 5 mile run when really the pace is too fast and our knee was a little sore before we started, that's when you're taking that departure and you're making a vote for instant gratification rather than honoring your highest goals, values, and ideals. And that one really hit home to me in that realm outside of my health and fitness commitments, because I can hardly even relate to someone that insists on putting more Ben and Jerry's pints in the shopping cart, knowing that many of those flavors have seed oils in them, and you're not doing yourself a service. And you've also stated to me, like your clients might state, "Yeah, I want to lose weight and look good, and I want to feel good, and I want to live a long time." Oh, great! Thank you for stating all those goals. Why did you have that shit in your shopping cart? That doesn't compute to me. But then someone can pull out my last month's credit card statement and say, "What's this, Brad, for $287?" I'm like, I don't recognize that company. Maybe I should call them up. I don't even have time to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love that. And it is interesting. We left out of the introduction, which I said would be 30 minutes. This is one of the things that would be included is your new book, which you wrote with Mark, called Born to Walk. And you make some really interesting points there that I completely agree with. I think it's a wonderful resource, and I would love to deep dive with you into that conversation today. And part of that conversation is saying to a lot of people, less is more when it comes to health and fitness, and those crushing workouts, like you said, may not be as beneficial as possible. But can you tell us why the two of you decided to write the book, and especially landed on the title, which is pretty great, pretty kind of nice little yeah, exactly.
Oh, look
Born
at
to
that.
Walk.
I happen to have a copy with me right here for those
There you
watching
go.
on video. Yeah. So the title is a takeoff on this wonderful 2009 bestseller titled Born to Run by Christopher McDougall. He did a great job. It still remains on the bestseller list 15 years later, which is so rare for a book. So it was a sensation, and it helped to catalyze the running boom, which of course has been going on for many decades. But it really got people tapping into this notion that humans have these amazing genetic attributes for endurance running. Unlike any other animal on the planet, we are the superior endurance creature on the planet if you put the race long enough. And there's a funny video on YouTube where they line up these different animals on the starting line. So you have the cheetah, the antelope, the bear, the giraffe, the endurance horse, the human. And of course, the cheetah kicks everyone's butt to 200 meters, but then the antelope takes over to a mile. But if you extend out to 100 miles, and we know this from the actual races, the Western States 100 is a foot race for humans, and they have the Tevis Cup for horses on the same course. The human can outlast any creature on Earth for extreme endurance endeavors. So you take this insight from evolutionary biology and you run with it today to help catalyze the running boom and sell more running shoes and gain more entries into marathon events. And that's where this has been a long-term, disastrous, dismal failure for devoted running enthusiasts to go out there, lace up elevated cushioned shoes, and run in the name of health, longevity, and achieving an amazing athletic feat. Now, I'm not against bucket list items and doing something that's really challenging and pushing your body. So the book is about doing it right and understanding that while humans might have amazing genetic attributes for endurance, it does not mean that we should lace up these shoes and take off down the sidewalk or the trail every day after day after day and put in long distances. And this never happened in the history of humanity. And even if you go back to evolutionary biology and our history as hunter-gatherers, we prevailed and got to the top of the food chain, not by outrunning a bunch of animals and taking them home as feast or bounty. We got there by outsmarting them and working in teamwork setting and confusing the animal and trapping them and setting a trap and sharpening our spears and outthinking the animal. And that's pretty obvious if you just go into on your next safari. Why don't you get out of your Jeep and take off and try to run down one of those wildebeests and kill it for dinner? It's not going to happen very well. So this endurance stuff has been glorified, misinterpreted, and misappropriated to think that we should be training for these ridiculous extreme events like a marathon. And again, if anyone's offended already early in the show, I'm an old-time endurance athlete. I lived and breathed running and triathlon for my younger years. I've done 50-mile endurance runs. I've done the Ironman. I've done, long distance bike rides and all these crazy endurance feats. But there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And unfortunately, for many people, the right way to be an endurance runner is to get extremely fit with full body functional fitness and musculoskeletal resiliency before you even contemplate anything beyond running a mile or two here and there, for example, before you go and play the pickup soccer game or whatever it is. So this idea that long distance running is good for the masses is a big problem. And there's a lot of reasons we can get into and talk about why. But the first indication is the rate of overuse injuries among regular runners is absolutely stunning and embarrassing. Yale University says 50% of regular runners get an overuse injury every year. Wake Forest says 73%. Research from Europe says 37%. So we're going to say around half of all runners are sidelined every year with Achilles tendonitis or shin splints or knee problems or a lower back tweak or whatever. And that's because of the pounding, the incorrect form that's facilitated by the use of the shoes, and a lack of baseline functional fitness that would allow one to run and benefit from it. Now, when I was a high school and college runner, I was a kid, I ran around, I was super fit, and so I jumped right into training and I thrived and I did well and it didn't break down my body. But to be able even to run a short distance, you got to be in really good shape and you have to run at a pace that's comfortable. And we can talk about fat max heart rate. I don't want to go without Casey getting a word in here, but we'll determine who should run and who shouldn't.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. We'll definitely be getting to that heart rate stuff. I've told you before on previous episodes that we've done, I worked with metabolic carts and could validate anecdotally that the fat max heart rate, the formula or validating on like a VO2 max test is legit. It definitely adds up and makes a lot of sense for everything that I've seen with the data over the years. So we'll definitely be talking about that. In the book, you guys do a great job talking about the history of how we got here. And that history also includes something you've already mentioned, the marathon, which I think is fascinating. I was made aware of this a few years ago reading The Road to Sparta by Dean Karnazes, which I know you guys love. Yeah, fascinating book, which talks about like ultra marathoning. And everybody knows, first of all, what you just said about, running not being as good for you as you think. Like 100 people out of 100 people I would stop on the street would tell me I was nuts if I told them that. And then secondly, everybody seems to know the history of the marathon, yet the story is completely different than what most people think.
You want to tell it, man? I would love to hear it. I can tell it. It's just such a shocker,
Well, I mean, so the story is Phidippides. I have a
Pheidippides, yeah.
Phidippides. Yeah, runs from the battle site where they had the battle back home to, is it Athens, which is a certain distance, and gets there and says it's Nike, right?
Nike, Neni Kayam. It means rejoice we conquer. And then he dropped dead.
Drop dead
And
right then.
so his distance was from the city of Marathon and the legendary Battle of Marathon to Athens. So he ran, and this is a real person. Phidippides is a legendary Greek foot messenger. They call him Hemerodromus, and his job in the army was to relay messages and engage in strategy. The Hemerodromus had a huge advantage over a horse because they could go over hilly terrain faster and spread the message and get ready for battle. So he did this historic run from Marathon to Athens, around 26 miles, and then announced victory and dropped dead. This is the foundation for the modern day marathon race of 26 miles, which first came about in the reenactment of the modern Olympic Games in 1896. They said, hey, let's do a marathon to honor the great Greek messenger from ancient times, Phidippides. Okay, so it's 26 miles. It jumped into the Olympics and came in every Olympics since then. And then, of course, branched out into be this cultural phenomenon that it is today. 2024, the New York City Marathon had the all-time record. I believe it was 54,000 finishers of one race. They all ran 26 miles. Okay, so here's the big problem that we're going to get to. The punchline and the fallout from it is that the famous run never happened. It was made up in an 1879 poem by Robert Browning, who took liberties with actual Greek history and just made this story up to create a fanciful poem that was referenced then to throw the marathon in the Olympic Games. So what really happened was this amazing athlete, Phidippides, ran 153 miles from Athens to Sparta to request the help of the Spartans in battle. He got there, he found out that they were on religious holiday. He had to turn around after a short break and run back to Athens and say, don't go to battle yet because we don't have help from the Spartans. They're on vacation. And so this guy ran 306 miles in 72 hours. And in Dean's book, what he did was recreate that initial route, that 153-mile race from Athens to Sparta. It's an organized event. And Dean was also cool because he decided to do it with ancient nutrition. So he had figs, wrapped up cheeses, and whatever.
Right.
I believe he used his modern running shoes, or he was going to use the sandals, and then he changed his mind. But anyway, this whole phenomenon that's the foundation for modern day competitive event is a falsehood. And so why is that important besides the cute story? We're setting an arbitrary distance and proclaiming it's the ultimate fitness achievement in the endurance community. I contend right now, if we just changed our minds and said, hey, look, a half marathon's a long freaking way to run too. Let's make that a marathon and just call it a marathon. It's 13 miles instead of 26. We'd all be better off. We could go out to brunch earlier in the day, including all the spectators that wait around for their runner to come in and raise their arms at the finish, because running 26.2 miles on pavement is completely antithetical to short-term and long-term human health. And this is not just an opinion from some guy on your podcast. It's validated by, they have research where the vast majority of runners who finish a marathon, if you immediately took them to the emergency room, they would present as having myocardial infarction. They would present as a heart attack patient if they took their blood values and looked at their liver enzymes and their cardiac enzymes and the fallout and the initial damage and destruction from pushing the body that hard and incurring that much impact trauma. And so immediately it's super bad for your body. Okay, that's the trade-off I'm going to make if I push myself really hard. But as we reference in the book in great length, those who engage in long-distance marathon training for years and decades have increased disease risk factors from someone who engages in fitness in a more sensible manner. There's a viral TED Talk on YouTube by Dr. James O'Keefe, one of the leaders of this excess endurance exercise hypothesis. The YouTube talk is titled Run for Your Life, but not too far and at a comfortable pace. And he talks about this sweet spot, the inverted U-shaped curve, where a few hours a week of comfortably paced cardio gives you an A+ in terms of health benefits of being active and disease protection from the number one killer on planet Earth today, which is cardiovascular disease. So all you have to do is get off your butt and, engage in a good amount of walking over the course of a week, short walks and long walks, all counting up together. Or if you like exercise and you want to get on the Stairmaster a couple days a week and, go here, go there, go for a hike on the weekend, you're dialed. You got an A+. And then as you extend out beyond this sweet spot of optimal cardiovascular conditioning, that's when you bring in the risk factors for overuse injury and cardiac problems over the long term.
Very good point. I remember coming across him after hearing you reference him as well, and I went back and saw that TED Talk and listened to some of his content, which I absolutely agree with. He's a great person to follow in that space. And yeah, as we're referencing, the history of all this stuff, we think back to like the 1950s, 1960s, where we went from like, if you saw somebody running down the street, you would think like they were insane, like something's going on, or you need to start running for something.
Yeah. What did they steal? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. To now this idea, we see people running around all over the place all the time. We don't give it a second thought. What was it that made running be something that was only for a select few, the elite athletes. Very few people would ever even dream of running 26.2 miles, regardless of whether it was based on a historical event or not, to
That's
where we are
right. Yeah.
today when anybody can join. And I believe this is true, that like the BMI of a finisher of a marathon is almost identical to the average BMI of a normal human anyway, where like it's not necessarily like a weight loss. How do we get to that place in more modern times?
Yeah, yeah. So a few things come up, and one of them is you set me up nicely for the title of chapter one in the book is "Opening the Floodgates in One Fell Swoosh." So the invention of the elevated cushion running shoe by Nike in 1973 or so, and bringing that to market enabled a poorly adapted, poorly physically conditioned person to slide on these shoes and take off running down the street without the initial severe penalty of running with poor form that might happen if you were running in the rudimentary shoes that came before the Nike invention. And Nike invented them. Bill Bowerman, the coach of the great University of Oregon runners, he invented these so that his elite runners, the guys who were training for the Olympics, could run more miles with a little more padding and not keep getting injured. So they're pushing the very edge of human capability with these crappy shoes. Now they have a nice waffle sole with the cushion, and they can feel better and continue running and training and getting faster. But as the company grew and the marketing campaigns like Just Do It, now we all became inspired to say, wow, maybe I could enter one of these events too. And 5Ks and 10Ks flourished. And then the marathon participation grew like crazy. And this was known as the running boom. And there's other checkpoints like Frank Shorter won the gold for the USA in 1972 Olympics in Munich in the marathon. So that was amazing to see a USA guy for the first time, or the first time in decades, win the marathon. Jim Fixx wrote a book that became a bestseller, The Complete Book of Running, and glorifying this amazing activity where you could, get away from the smoking and the drinking and the pills and all the things that, 70s culture where we people were just not interested in fitness. And then the fitness boom occurred. At the same time, Jane Fonda started getting us doing aerobics and selling the VHS tapes, and all this great stuff occurred to get America and the world more active. But in terms of running and the specific example of those elevated cushion shoes, now what happened is taking off and going beyond your physical and musculoskeletal capacity was made possible because you don't have that immediate penalty, and you were able to accumulate a bunch of miles and thereby incur all this impact trauma that would eventually crack in the form of the Achilles tendonitis, the plantar fasciitis, the knee problems, the hip problems, and all these things. And so running shoes enable a poorly conditioned runner to exhibit poor form. And Dr. Lieberman at Harvard, one of the world's foremost experts on barefoot running, probably the foremost expert, has studied this phenomenon and determined that 80 to 95% of all recreational runners run with crappy form as exhibited by this heel striking, jarring, breaking, overstriding pattern. So what happens when you don't have the graceful power to run like the guys we see in the Olympics and the gals? You just kind of shuffle along. So we really should call it shuffling rather than running, because the human running gait pattern from exercise physiology entails a midfoot landing over a balanced center of gravity, a full extension of the arch and a full extension of the Achilles tendon, and then a harnessing of rotational kinetic energy to take off and run and look like a deer and look like someone who's actually running. So the shuffle stride instead is this breaking pattern where every step the heel lands first, which is not correct for human running pattern. It is for walking, by the way. Heel toe walking stride is the human walking gait. But for running, you got to be on your feet and you have to have tremendous musculoskeletal resiliency, good core strength, good hip flexor mobility, good hamstring engagement, strong glute functionality, and all these things that most people don't have. And that's why they end up shuffling. And so when you shuffle instead of run correctly, that's when you get these micro traumas and overuse injury. So in terms of unlocking the freedom and the permission to run, the first thing is to run with correct form. Now, if we all of a sudden correct your form and send you running off down the road or the track, you're going to get tired because you're going to be running faster than your shuffle pace, and now you're turning into a runner. And maybe the ticket here is to run for 50 or 75 or 100 or 200 meters and then stop and walk because you notice that your form is degrading and compromising due to fatigue. You can only run so slow, right, Casey? I mean, if you start going slower than that, the human gait pattern actually changes from a brisk walk into a jog at 13:57 per mile. So 14-minute mile, it's time to start either race walking like the guys in the Olympics with the swivel hips, or you launch into a graceful jog. So that's the biomechanics of running. Now we have another overlay. If I should keep talking, and let me pause if you need to set up. But the overlay is how strenuous is it to actually run with good form at faster than 14 minutes a mile? And that's where we come into the heart rate question.
Yeah, excellent. We can definitely talk about that. Ironically, to fix somebody's form, one of the best things you could do is just remove the shoes altogether, and people will naturally just settle in and have amazing form when they run.
Yeah,
Just
this is super
remove the shoe.
funny. And Barefoot Ted, one of the barefoot footwear leaders, and he's a character that was featured in the Born to Run book. He would come to our seminars and take people on a running technique session. And the first thing would be, everybody remove your shoes and get onto hard concrete, a smooth concrete path with no debris or anything. And he'd say, okay, take off running. So what happens to anyone, even the most novice runner who hasn't run since high school, it's been 30 years, or someone who's overweight and out of shape, anyone will immediately exhibit correct form when running barefoot on a hard surface, because the brain now engages in this wonderful proprioception with the intense nerve endings at the bottom of our feet, and is able to immediately adjust one's impact, balance, and carriage of the center of gravity in order to run in a graceful manner. Now, can they go take off and run 5 miles? Of course not. After 50 meters, they might be tired, and maybe your foot might be a little sore the next day, but you can immediately know what it's like to exhibit correct form by running barefoot on a hard surface.
Yeah, that's so well explained. I see that in people's upper body as well. If I'm looking and seeing somebody even at a great distance and they're running, if I can see their upper body, I can tell whether they're wearing minimal footwear or running barefoot,
Oh,
because their
yeah,
their
yeah,
form is just so different. And yeah,
yeah.
let's address that heart rate thing. I think that's a big deal. Most people would assume, since they jump onto that treadmill, they throw on their padded shoes, the treadmill's measuring heart rate, and it's showing them, the number of calories that they're burning as they're going. So of course, the greater number of calories that you can burn in a session on the treadmill is better, and that just ticks off if you're running at a faster rate versus a slower rate. People might feel like they're doing the most amazing thing for themselves by burning tons of
Mm.
calories and getting their heart rate way high. Can you explain that kind of key heart rate and why that's so critical to understand?
Yeah, I think first, when you mentioned that simple example of everyone obsessing about calories, I think now generally the health movement, fitness movement is doing a good job destroying this flawed and oversimplified notion of calories in, calories out, even though Lane Norton and someone else might say it's literally true from a biomechanical, biological perspective. But there's so many other variables. And the main variable here for strenuous exercise and fitness protocol is that the compensation theory of exercise is what it's known as. This is an area of science and research, is that your body engages in an assortment of compensation mechanisms in order to counterbalance an excess of energy expenditure in workouts that are slightly too significantly too stressful. So if you go on that treadmill and you set the incline and you want to get the calorie burning up to 750 per hour instead of 650, you are going to burn those calories. Highly inaccurate. Also inaccurate is the calories that we actually absorb and process from food. So both sides of the equation are deeply flawed anyway. But let's just say you're burning more calories at your morning workout. You will then, over the course of the day, become more lazy, burn fewer calories, and this happens both consciously and subconsciously. So consciously, you did your badass, you crushed the workout in the morning, and then you come home and your partner says, "Honey, can you rake the leaves in the front yard today?" And you say, "Well, I'll do that tomorrow because I really crushed a workout this morning. I'm going to rest." So that's the conscious part. Subconsciously is where you're not so inclined to jump up and go get another stack of post-it notes down the hall in the office. You're just going to sit in your cubicle instead. Everything's going to move a little slower. And also, you're going to dysregulate your appetite and your satiety mechanisms in order to overconsume calories as a genetically programmed survival instinct against the frequent and routine depletion of energy that occurs from a fitness protocol that's too strenuous. And I'm talking about a pattern here, right? I'm not talking about like, hey, you worked out too hard on Sunday, your life is ruined, and you can write off the rest of your weight loss goals. It's more of this day after day after day, going a little bit above your capability, getting a little bit tired, a little bit washed out, and feeling low blood sugar after workouts. And then you tend to overeat over the next 12, 24, 48 hours, undereat, and be less generally active. So that's the compensation theory that we need to address right away when you're talking about that calorie reading on the treadmill. Therefore, what happens when that compensation theory kicks in is you actually, with a chronically overly stressful exercise program, you send the genetic signals to store fat and drop lean muscle mass because that's another activation of the stress response, gluconeogenesis, and all these things that are happening when you get washed out and depleted from a routine workout pattern that's too tough. And not only do you have the propensity and the genetic signaling to store more fat, it is preferentially visceral fat, which is the highly health destructive type of fat that collects around the abdominal organs. And that is a direct consequence of a training program that pumps out too much cortisol too frequently for too long a duration. So it's getting the wrong kind of fat, losing muscle. In the marathon scene, they call it the skinny fat physique, and you reference the data that's from one study at the Cape Town, South Africa Marathon, that 30% of the participants in the marathon were beyond healthy body mass index ratings, which is kind of like you can't distinguish between the spectators and the runners, then you know your sport has a problem. Same with the injury rate, as I mentioned, that's way higher than the NFL. So the NFL is 31% annual injury rate, 8% typically any given week. Of course, their injuries are different, but to make the funny point here, like you're not getting tackled out on the roads and trails. So if you're getting injured, 50% of your athletes are injured every year, you got a problem with the methodology.
Yeah, so well explained. I love that. So for somebody thinking about, heart rate, or even just going off of a rate of perceived exertion scale of like 1 to 10, do you kind of follow the MAF, the Phil Maffetone kind of formula, 180 minus your age, kind of a recommendation as far as where to keep people's heart rates?
Yeah, so for sure. The 180 minus age formula is what Maffetone calls maximum aerobic function, or we have this scientific term that you can obtain from the metabolic cart that you describe, where you identify, it's called different things like ventilatory threshold or fat max heart rate. And so what fat max heart rate is, that is the point that you are burning the maximum number of fat calories per minute at whatever exercise intensity that is, as evidenced by heart rate. So there's a point where you burn the most fat calories per minute, and if you were to speed up, of course you're going to burn more total calories. You burn more calories sprinting than you do walking, I promise, right? So the faster you go, the more calories, but at a point you start to decline in fat metabolism in favor of a quick spike in glucose metabolism, and also a quick spike in ventilation and stress hormone production and all these things. So this fat max heart rate is kind of a cutoff point between a workout that is comfortable, energizing, nourishing, restorative, and a workout that is slightly to significantly stressful and more preferential to glucose, sugar burning than fat burning. So if you routinely exceed this fat max heart rate, what happens is you become, generally speaking, a good sugar burner and a good sugar chomper. So you crush the workout in the morning and you crush the pint of Ben & Jerry's in the evening. I'm sorry, I just lost a sponsor for Boundless Body
Damn it.
podcast, but it goes hand in hand with depleting nature and exhausting nature of workout patterns. So how do you know fat max heart rate? That 180 minus your age in beats per minute formula is really highly respected. Dr. Maffetone's been pumping this information for decades, and people are finally listening. And here's the shocking revelation for most people: is this is a surprisingly comfortable intensity level to exercise at. It barely feels like you're getting a workout when you're going at 180 minus age. We talked about me just turning 60, so I'm now a 120 maximum aerobic heart rate or fat max heart rate. That is pretty much of a slow jog, even though I'm in great shape and I can go fast in the 400 meters. I need to keep things really, really mellow to emphasize fat burning and not exhaust my resources and kick into these compensation theory mechanisms. So a 40-year-old, 180 minus 40, you're going to set that beeper alarm for 140. You're going to take off jogging down the street. And for the vast majority of people who engage in endurance running right now and endurance training of any kind, they are going to need to do the vast majority of their training at a medium to brisk walk, maybe a very slow jog if they're super fit. And I'm using research to make this assertion that most people should be walking because we have data on, for example, the average marathon finishing times across the world. Only 2% of runners break 3 hours in the marathon. In the old days, it was a huge percentage because, again, those crappy shoes only had skinny, athletic, highly trained people even attempting a marathon. So now, with the age of shuffling, the average marathon time around the world is 4:31. That's a 10:18 pace per mile. That's an extremely impressive fitness achievement. Most people that are running can't go out and run a marathon, let alone run at an average time rather than a below average time. So the average marathon runner running 10 something per mile, that is going to indicate that most people out there, besides accomplished marathoners, anyone below average in the marathon or anyone who's not quite capable of doing a marathon is going to drift up to that cutoff point of 13:57 per mile and be required to stay under that heart rate for the vast majority of their training.
Yep. Yeah, that's such a good point. And again, anecdotally, I can say the heart rate equation almost always matched up with a peak fat burn. You can improve that by changing your diet. That's the whole reason I found ketogenic and carnivore type diets to begin with. Is I learned how to not ever bonk when I was out cycling when you change
Yeah,
your diet, and it
yeah.
almost always correlated with when I asked people at every step stage in a test. How are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? If 1 is sitting around watching Netflix, 10 is as hard as you can go. It was almost always about a 5 out of 10
Uh,
that it correlated with. So yeah,
here's
people
another
need to
one
remember that.
I want to ask you about that changing the diet concept. So we know that changing the diet has incredibly powerful repercussions and benefits to your metabolic function. But I've had a lot of occasions where you tell someone to change their diet, they absolutely need to change their training because you ain't changing no diet and you ain't going keto. If you're going above that heart rate at your workouts, you're going to be going for that Ben and Jerry after going keto all day and trying to do what Coach Casey said. And now you're busted because you're a sugar burner and you're training that sugar burning not only in diet. I'm glad you brought that point up, but also with your training. So it's kind of a two-phase approach here. How do I become a fat burner? We're going to go on both parallel tracks and do really well and support each other.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And that's why I think of it as not only your training plan periodization, but your diet plan periodization, where it would not be great to take an athlete in competition and start to change their diet. That's not the best time for it, but maybe in the off season when we can reduce that load and get people working at a lower workload, that's a great time to change the diet in my experience. So yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Before we talk about the promoting walking, we'll continue bashing running for a minute. You talk about chronic cardio, and I use the word cardio because it's so ubiquitous and everybody knows cardio means you're doing something quote unquote aerobic, which means getting your heart rate up, and it's good for you. It's good for your heart. Everybody knows that. But
Mm.
even when you stop and think about it, it's like, well, when did we start calling this cardio? Why did we start calling it cardio? Is it as good for us as we think it is?
Yeah, was it Jane Fonda's marketing experts getting the script going for her first few videos of like, we need some cardio. The other thing that comes to mind is that any form of exercise is literally by definition cardio. So if you're a musclehead and you drive over to the gym, you park your car, you get out of your car and you start walking to the gym, as soon as you get out of your car, your heart rate is now probably somewhere around double resting rate. You wait in line to get the towel and beep your card at the front desk. It's still up there in a cardiovascular training zone. Then you go out to the room, the showroom. You pedal the bicycle a little bit for some cardio warm up, and then you go lift weights. And I noticed that you like to sit on your machines and send text messages in between your sets. And I'm like, I'm not a bro from the fitness culture. I don't spend too much time in the gym. I'm more on the track. But I'm wondering, like, it seems like it's okay for you to send freaking text messages on the one machine that I want to use. Like, can you go and should we put up a text message bench somewhere in the gym? Okay, an aside. But during this whole hour and a half, from the time you left your car to the time you're back in the car, you are literally getting a cardiovascular training session. And that's the thing that's totally disrespected, to put cardio in this funnel and think that we have to do steady state cardio in order to check that box in our fitness objectives. Same with playing pickup basketball. Hey, you're on the bench for 4 minutes in between periods. Your heart rate is still recovering from that anaerobic activity, that jumping, then that tough defense that you played to shut your guy down. And then you're going back out, you're getting anaerobic, you're back into the aerobic zone, you're in the anaerobic zone, then you're resting. And all this counts toward this objective of building your cardiovascular fitness. And steady state is just a tiny slice of the pie in what it means overall to have full body functional fitness for longevity. But generally speaking, we overweight this part of the pie. We become overweight doing so, and then at the expense of really having the energy, the motivation, the inspiration, and the time to go and dedicate to a proper resistance training protocol, not to mention sprinting and jumping and doing the explosive high intensity stuff that gives the best return on investment of any fitness exercise. We don't have the energy anymore because we're spending 30 miles a week on the road, or 40 or 50 trying to get ready for the next marathon.
Yeah, totally. I've been taught that when you find that person at the gym, and every gym has the person, there's several people who are on their cell phones between sets, to go up there, go up to them and ask them how many more sets of Facebook they have left, to see if you can kind of work in. I thought that was well said. Just make sure the person is smaller than you, not bigger than you. So
I just thought of it. I just thought of another one. I could go up to them and ask them for their number so I could send them a text message.
There you go.
Apparently, that's what we're all here to do.
There you go. Can I work in?
Hey
Seriously.
man, what's your number? I want to send you a text because I guess is this a texting room?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
This is it. That's funny. Okay,
My mouth is smaller because my muscles are smaller, so it has to be the same size muscles as the mouth. Yeah.
Good call. Oh man, good call. Okay, so yeah, you kind of divide the book into two parts, and we've obviously skipped over a lot of the first part, and it's like kind of demystifying the myths about running, and the second part is promoting the benefits of walking. I certainly tell people, besides some periodic and very challenging strength training sessions, that walking is the most beneficial thing that anybody can do. I find there to be a linear benefit as long as people are not like overdoing it. So it's not to make the same mistake as a lot of people did when Born to Run came out and everybody got, the Vibram shoes and started pounding pavement on minimalist footwear, and they all, got hurt, and we know how that ended up. But like, if it feels good to walk, I see more of kind of a linear benefit. Can you tell us what are some of the things that makes walking so much better for more people than not?
Well, just to continue to try to convince the skeptics or those who are a little disappointed to hear that their running is not serving them, whatever your fat max heart rate is and whatever you're capable of, sure, you have permission to run, and there's no limit to the benefits of being active and getting many hours out in nature and moving your body instead of sitting around. I have two high school buddies, both named Steven, and they're amazing endurance machines, and they're still running and training and doing great feats 40 plus years after we were buddies running on the high school team. However, they're highly conditioned, highly adapted, and running works for them because their heart rate is beeping at 118 while they're running down the road. So it's all about your efficiency at that fat max heart rate. And guess what? If you have to build up your capabilities, you will get more and more efficient as a fat burner. You change your diet. Casey gave you all the protocols, and now you're eating well, you're exercising sensibly. You're going to get faster at that same heart rate. So the 40-year-old, where the beeping occurs at 140 when they ascend a little hill and have to walk, months later, you're going to be able to move from a brisk walk into a slow jog if you train correctly. So it's just like getting this permission to run with correct form at the correct heart rate. Now we have the reality, which is you're getting an excellent cardiovascular training session, even at the lower zones. Like they talk about zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. Zone 2, the top of zone 2 correlates with fat max heart rate. generally when I hear people talk about it. So I really appreciate the emphasis on zone two. And now this has become lexicon in the fitness world. So that's wonderful because they're talking about a comfortably paced session. But it doesn't mean that all your training has to peg right at the zone two number. And in fact, there are tremendous benefits from these restorative workouts that occur in zone one. If you need more convincing, we talk at length in the book about the greatest marathon runner of all time. His name is Eliud Kipchoge from Kenya. He's the guy who ran the hour 59 marathon, break the mythical barrier. He's a two-time Olympic gold medalist, and he's published his training log on the internet for all the exercise physiologists and coaches to scrutinize. It turns out he runs 83% of his weekly mileage in zone one, not zone two, zone one. 9% zone two, 7% at the higher stuff where he's doing these amazing interval workouts that you can see on YouTube. And wow, that guy's amazing. However, his zone one, because he's the GOAT, is a 6.5 to 8 minute per mile at high altitude for a 17-mile easy day. Okay. But we have to understand that intensity is relative. So for you to honor the greatest runner of all time, which in fact you should tone it down a few steps because Kipchoge also sleeps for 12 hours a day and has the amazing genetic gifts to be a machine of endurance. So we want to honor him, but maybe not as not as an extreme a commitment. And so mostly we're going to be training our body for endurance by doing medium to brisk walks. That's just the exercise physiology reality for almost everyone, except for those skinny freaks who have been running for the last 47 years since high school and can take off and jog and still get an appropriate aerobic training session. Now we get to the other major benefit of walking instead of shuffling, jogging with the elevated cushion shoes, and that is you have no impact trauma. So the most impact trauma on walking is 1x body weight, right? And because your one foot is on the ground at all times. That's the definition of walking gait as opposed to running gait where both feet are in the air during the flight phase and then you land and generate 2 to 3 times body weight minimum even when you're jogging slowly, 5 times body weight when you're sprinting.
That's such a good point. I love that. You've eliminated Ben and Jerry's as a potential show sponsor. We've lost the New York Marathon as a potential sponsor. Now we're probably going to lose Nike as well as a potential sponsor. But let's talk about transitioning into minimal footwear when people are considering walking a little bit more. What features should people be looking out for as far as like minimal footwear, and what are some practical tips to kind of transition into that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the minimalist shoe movement has been a wonderful innovation away from these shoes that pinch our toes together and restrict our foot functionality. And also, the single most destructive aspect of the modern shoe is the elevated heel, because the elevated heel destroys the functionality of the Achilles tendon, and it also throws off your posture even when you're standing. Forget about moving or exercising or running. As soon as the heel goes off the ground, your body weight is forced to load over onto your midfoot rather than where it's designed to load, which is on that super dense and cross-reinforced heel bone, the calcaneus. That's why it's so tough, is because it's supposed to hold the human up, and you're supposed to stack your body weight and your center of gravity. Your spine loads over your hips, over your knees, over your heels. And so the elevated shoe immediately sends you into the world of compromised proprioception, poor technique for dangerous things like deadlifting and squatting and running. And it's been an absolute unmitigated disaster. Now we have the stats that is it 80 American Podiatric Association says 83% of Americans complain of chronic foot pain.
Oh
And
my
then we
goodness, that's
have
crazy.
the industry of inserts and comforts and injections and medications and getting people to the finish line with horribly disfigured and dysfunctional feet, corns, bunions, hammer toes, plantar warts, all the things that are caused by pinching our feet together. So this concept that humans are made to be barefoot and that the foot is an incredibly intricate and complex and highly efficient tool to absorb impact, balance moving body weight, and generate takeoff propulsion. So those are the 3 main things that your foot does during the gait pattern of walking, of running, of doing any athletic activity. And so all those things, the 3 things, absorb impact, balance moving body weight, generate forward propulsion, are disastrously compromised by any shoe. Of course, a dress shoe, you can understand this, or a high heel shoe is, of course, messing with your foot. But even a super high tech modern running shoe or athletic shoe is not allowing the toes to operate independently in order to splay when they land, to absorb the impact. The big toe is the single most important joint in the human body for human locomotion. And in fact, the entire weight of your body loads over this single joint every time you take a walking stride. And if the big toe is forced up against the other toes and not allowed to dorsiflex gracefully and load that body weight and generate forward propulsion, primarily by triggering the activation of the glutes. So the big toe is also the primary activator of the gluteus muscle, which happens to be the largest and most powerful in the body. So when the glutes are dysfunctional, which is like, excuse me, name any physical therapist or sports trainer, that's like one of the major problems in physical therapy is people have dysfunctional glutes and they get low back problems and all kinds of other problems. So when the glutes are not engaged, because they are not triggered by that big toe activation, then you tend to have poor technique, whether it's playing basketball, running, even walking to a lesser extent. But mainly these athletic injuries come from dysfunctional glutes, strongly driven by your choice of footwear. Oh, the Achilles tendon. What kind of a big deal is that? We have a little booklet on palooza.com, the definitive guide to a barefoot and minimalist shoe lifestyle. And I talk about this research from leading primatologist Bill Sellers. He says the Achilles tendon is, quote, the primary evolutionary adaptation of the human to become human, to branch away from the other apes and become this amazing endurance machine and this persistence hunter who has risen to the top of the food chain. Because the Achilles tendon allows us to run or walk with tremendous increase in efficiency. It's like an 80% increase in efficiency from go down to the Salt Lake City Zoo tomorrow and watch the chimps race around their cage, or the gorillas without an Achilles tendon. They're waddling around and they're extremely incapable of doing anything for any significance without that Achilles tendon. So when we render the Achilles tendon less functional by, again, elevating it off the ground with the elevation of the shoe, or in other ways by wearing a more rigid sole, or your orthotics, which you paid so much for to get that rigid landing area to inhibit the foot from pronating and activating the Achilles tendon, we're in for big trouble. And so, I mean, to me, doing this research and getting that sound bite of like, wait a second, the primary evolutionary adaptation, that is pretty big time. Opposable thumb is another one, and non-opposable big toe, as a matter of fact, as opposed to the toe sticking out. These are the things that made us human and make us human today. And that's obviously a huge area of injury and dysfunction are these weak Achilles, because they've been deloaded our entire life because they're up off the ground rather than allowed to go through full range of motion on everything we do.
Wow, that's such a good point. I just got back from Dave Feldman's conference in Las Vegas. I love low carbohydrate conferences for many reasons, but one of the cool things I've observed over the years is that there's so many other health practices that end up converging at a conference like that. And so you get a disproportionate number of people walking around the conference hall, either barefoot or they're wearing Vivos or, whatever minimal footwear, which I resisted in my own life. I only did it, 3-4 years ago, and I didn't want to get rid of all my expensive shoes at the time, but switching over to minimal footwear is absolutely life-changing. I would never, ever, ever go back. And obviously, there's lots of different brands now, lots of different styles that people can choose. You mentioned your favorite. Can you talk about some of the features of Palooza, which I did see 2 different pair at this conference? Can you tell us about the design and why it's a little bit different?
Yeah, so my main man and longtime mentor and co-author, Mark Sisson, we've been promoting the primal movement for almost 2 decades now. This was his obsession for many, many years. Was the barefoot shoe market and making the ultimate barefoot shoe. So he launched this company with his son Kyle only a year and a half ago or so, and the response has been sensational, overwhelming. So I'm deeply involved. I'm a part owner, and we are so excited to promote the barefoot movement and release what we feel is the ultimate barefoot-inspired shoe, namely because it has that 5-toe functionality. So there's an independent slot for each toe. It's a barefoot-looking shoe, and I know we throw that term barefoot around, but if you're toes are encased in a single box, it's a minimalist shoe that's way better than a shoe that has a compressed area for the toe box. But this is the necessity to truly call it a barefoot shoe, allowing your toes to operate independently and dynamically on multiple ranges of motion. This term is called toe splay. So when you land on the ground, your toes flatten out and spread out, and then they grab the ground to allow you to push off. And you can't do that when the toes are pressed together. So we have that feature of the 5 independent toes. And then, of course, the other key features for all minimalist shoes to qualify to get into the club, you have to have that zero drop feature. Zero drop meaning that the heel is the same level off the ground as the midfoot and the toes. So there's no elevation of the heel. It's not pointing downhill when your foot goes in the shoe. Zero drop, and then the other one is flexible sole. So you do not want that rigid sole. And I have videos on my Instagram site of climbing the world famous Cactus to Clouds Trail in Palm Springs. It's the steepest, it's the single most difficult hiking trail in the United States, maybe the world, by measure of sustained vertical elevation. You climb 8,400 feet in the first 9.3 miles. Total hike is 22 miles. And I wore these minimalist Peluva barefoot shoes on this extremely steep and rugged trail. And every step I took, I felt exactly what was underneath a foot. So if I stepped on a pebble or a protruding rock or a branch or something that was, disruptive and disturbing, my toes and my entire foot and my ankle were able to react and perhaps bend that ankle sideways a bit and bend the second and third toes up high because I stepped on a rock. And it doesn't sound fun, but it's vastly more comfortable and functional than stomping through an all-day hike in a rigid hiking boot that has your feet off the ground. And in fact, that's how you get injuries like flipping that ankle spontaneously and destructively when you take a misstep and you can't catch yourself. So we have to rethink what it means to have foot protection and foot functionality. The other feature of Peluva is we have some cushion. We have 9 millimeters of cushion, unlike the original barefoot shoes, which were just a thin slab of rubber with no cushion by design, because they wanted you to have a true barefoot experience. But today, as the thinking goes, we have all these unnatural, hard, man-made surfaces to negotiate, indoor and outdoor. So we need a little cushion as a compromise to modern life. And people talk about ancestral health and modeling. The great examples of our ancestors got a lot of sunlight and they ate good food and they did a lot of exercise. Well, they were walking barefoot or with rudimentary protection over packed savanna, snow, sand, dirt, grass. They weren't walking on marble floors and gym floors and cement sidewalks. So we're still modeling the barefoot ideals of our ancestors, but we're doing it with a shoe that also looks good, is fashionable. You can wear to the store, you can wear shopping, you can wear out to dinner. Mark Sisson says I wear these to weddings, funerals, and everything else in between. But especially like in the gym, when you're loading body weight on your body, you need that barefoot functionality and that proprioceptions with your feet as close as possible to the ground and your toes able to operate independently.
Yeah, so underrated. I can absolutely attest to that. That you take funky steps every now and again, and you think you're going to roll your ankle. I used to roll my ankle all the time, dude. But going
Me too.
barefoot, I'd
Yeah.
never ever have that issue.
It's
That's
almost
phenomenal.
impossible, right?
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
mean,
and that. Go
yeah.
ahead.
I mean, does anyone turn their ankle barefoot? It's impossible.
I have not heard
Yeah.
of it. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
never heard of that happening. And I like the thickness that you're describing. My footwear will vary somewhere between 6 and 12 mil, and my 6 mil is really just for kind of like around the house kind of stuff. If I put a lot of miles on that, it's a little bit much. I prefer my day to day to be about that 9 mil, and then 12 mil I use for kind of like hiking applications. So I think that 9 is a great sweet spot to be there. And like I said, I saw several pair this weekend, and they do look really good. They dress up nice. They look great. Are there any other key features of the book that you would want people to know about that we haven't covered at this point?
I think we covered this briefly, but when you extricate from this flawed cultural programming and realize that you don't have to struggle and suffer to get fit, and you don't have to pound day after day, week after week, and grind out these miles to become a competent endurance athlete, what happens is you open yourself up to a whole new world of fitness possibilities, namely that you have the energy and the time allocation to pursue what it means to be truly fit as a human. And this is from original Primal Blueprint commentary, the first book that Mark Sisson and I put out back in 2009. The ancestral model of fitness is a blend of comfortable, low level, everyday movement in every way. Of course, walking is the centerpiece of how we move, but this also counts your Pilates, your yoga routine, your home graceful stretching routine, Tai Chi that they do in the streets in Asia, and all those things count toward our movement objective. Even foam rolling, by the way, you're getting some movement into your body, so that counts toward your movement objectives. That's the foundation. And then we have to put our body under resistance load on a regular basis, and we have to still hone that explosive, high intensity, short duration maximum output. We use the term sprinting. You think sprinting, running down the track in the Olympics, but sprinting can mean anything that's brief in duration that brings you to near maximum explosive, powerful effort. So you can sprint on a stationary bike, on a rowing machine. You can do kettlebell swings in a sprint fashion where we're going to go for 10 seconds and then we're going to take a break. So I should give a couple really quick tidbits about what a proper sprint workout really is when you want to transition in there. When I say that term sprint, I'm talking about that first energy system of ATP creatine phosphate. So it's not like high intensity interval training where you're doing 3 minutes fast and then 2 minutes faster and then another minute and then you repeat. All that stuff is one form of conditioning. And it's often abused just like the extreme endurance training is abused where it becomes too tough. But a true sprint workout is where you're sprinting from an ideal sweet spot of around 10 to 20 seconds, no longer than 20 seconds. Even even anything longer than 10 seconds is not a true sprint, but you can go pretty hard for 20. And so we're going to count that as our sweet spot window. And then you require a recovery period of 6-to-1 ratio of rest to recovery minimum. So if you sprint for 10 seconds, you are to take 1 minute rest, which seems like way too long. And what am I doing? I'm still spinning the bike and waiting for the next minute to come. But you're able to, again, deliver a very explosive, precise technique, peak performance effort for that 10-second duration, or 20 if, for example, you're going low impact. You can go up to 20 on a stationary bike. I'd say 10 seconds on flat ground or something that's more difficult. So we're sprinting 10 to 20 seconds, 6-to-1 recovery to work ratio, and we're only doing 4 to 8. And that is a beautiful sprint workout. It's not about volume. And guess what? When we come back on the show a year from now and the caller comes in and says, "Oh, Casey, hi, Brad. Thanks. I've been doing sprinting. I feel great. Should I do 12 now or 14 or 16?" The answer is the way you improve your competency in sprinting is you take those 4 to 8 reps and you go faster and faster and faster. Or you progress from stationary bike to running on flat ground where you get the most bone density and fat reduction benefits.
Well said. No, that's so well described. I really love that. And that makes it really approachable for everybody. And just reframing, you're just reframing a few certain things like we've been doing in this conversation, helping people think about that the proper way. I look at your life and your content and your energy and all the stuff that you're putting out there. You're always learning and refining, the way you think about things. You're working very hard to get that message out to try to help people. You and Mark are just the best in the world at that. And I just have to say on a personal note, as I said in the introduction, you were hosted on episode 24 of our show. This episode will be coming out. It's going to be episode like 775 or something. It's going to be, a lot. But on a personal note, I just have to go way out of my way to thank you for being one of the very first people to say, yes, I would like to be on your show. You didn't respond by asking how many downloads we'd had, which was, basically like somebody's guest mom had listened 3 times, maybe our only listens. Yeah. And you came on our show and shared your knowledge and education then, and to be willing to come back on and go for over an hour discussing your latest book is fantastic. But again, just on a personal note, I just have to really thank you so very much for being willing to share your message and being willing to be on our show.
Well, I mean, back at you for dedicating yourself to podcasting and getting the word out and doing so many episodes, but especially coming out of the gate, like you had a story to tell, you knew you wanted to connect people. And so I would absolutely, support that regardless of how many downloads. I kind of think about it like this, Casey. If someone invited me to come down to my local public library and said, "We are going to have a standing room only crowd of 100 people tonight to come listen to you talk about whatever," of course I would go and be honored to connect. But the same thing is happening running through the airwaves on podcasting, and that's what makes it so beautiful, is that I can't do 50 library dates a year, but we can get out there and connect in a manner that we never would before. And one of my favorite things is listening, reading the emails from podcast listeners. I host the BRAD podcast, and Jerome will write in from La Réunion. And I happen to know where that is because I almost did a triathlon there. But for those of you not knowing, it is possibly the furthest away you could get from California on the globe. It's an island off the coast of Madagascar in the southern hemisphere,
Wow.
and it's a French territory called La Réunion. You can look it up if you want, but it's spelled like American English reunion. But like, I got so excited just from this random email. I'm like, "You're listening to the BRAD podcast in La Réunion?" And he's like, "You know where that is?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, I almost went there. It's a volcanic island. It's beautiful." Oh my gosh. So being able to, come together in this manner. But as you just mentioned, coming back from the trade show, I can't wait to, meet you up in person and, build that type of community as well as the podcast community.
For sure. Well, again, you're just amazing to follow, and I love your content. For now, where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work?
So we talked about Born to Walk, and we have a great website called borntowalkbook.com. Tremendous additional resources and downloaded PDFs you can print out and put on your favorite fitness area, all for free. So you can learn more about the book there. I think you'll be enticed to give it a read or a listen. And then my own website is bradkearns.com. Love to connect with people. Find the BRAD podcast all over where you listen to Boundless Body. And just an honor and pleasure to connect with you again, Casey.
Yeah, let's make it not be so long next time we chat. Let's chat in a year or so and follow up. You're always,
For
again,
sure.
learning interesting things and sharing your content so graciously. And yeah, I'm so happy for you. Happy birthday. I know 60 is going to be awesome for you. Was for Mark Sisson, and he's still thriving in his 70s. So good luck with all the track and field events. And as always, thank you so very much for coming on our show today, Brad. We really appreciate you.
Keep it up, Casey.
Thanks, man. You too. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.